for higher end, although, it could apply to any of the markets you're selling to, theoretically. I guess, Greg, I don't know if you were on any of the other, webinars that I did, but just background, did a ed tech company originally. That's how I got into marketing. Eventually started an agency that we do now. We work with startups here in the Bay Area. Big regret for me is not focusing enough on the marketing and not treating the ed tech company like a marketing company in general. So, I got an idea of this overall, but Greg, who, just kind of for purposes, who does the marketing on your team? Do you have a?
So I do most of it, but now some of our part-time hires are helping with that. They're helping hire some content writers for inbound content and managing them on Upwork, and other people are doing some outreach and building partnerships. But I'm coordinating everything because I'm the only one who's doing full-time marketing.
Got it. Nice. Cool. And then, so do you do direct sales at all?
I do contact people directly through LinkedIn, set up meetings, and get referrals and things like that.
Totally.
Just FYI, we had AJ Dillon from Innovair join the call.
Hey, AJ.
Hey, everyone. How are you?
You want to give kind of a little background on you guys?
Sure. We are an ed tech company that focuses on supporting continuous improvement within education. We focus on addressing the pain points of principals, superintendents, board members, basically the elite leadership reps within education. Think of us as business intelligence for education leadership. We've been around 2 years. We're a profitable company. I started at Alumnus and headquartered in Chicago.
Cool. And are you directly involved in the marketing or sales?
Yeah, I'm actually the strategy teams, we call it here, the growth strategy team leader. So everything that has to do with sales, marketing, etc.
Awesome. All right. So essentially, kind of what ABM is about really is kind of sales as an art form in 2019, where marketing and sales really have become kind of synonymous with each other, whereas originally it was kind of the opposite per se. I'd like to give a little background on the industry. Generally speaking, ed tech is a little lower on the side as far as investing money into marketing, especially for smaller, earlier stage companies. And a lot of it is actually in referrals. But with respect to sales, really for higher ed, cold email kind of is the biggest factor as far as launching an ABM strategy. I'll go into specifically some ways in which you can use email as part of a larger strategy, but to give a definition of ABM, just so everybody's kind of familiar, it's essentially all the activities around sales that produce and lead accounts along the funnel. And it's essentially using and integrating marketing, whether it's paid advertising, email remarketing, the various tools that are out there into the sales funnel, where you're utilizing that info to help the sales, one and the same. There's a lot of tools out there. So if you've ever heard of, Pardot, HubSpot to a certain degree, Marketo, all these automation tools, they're typically used by people for ABM. We're actually in a later stage now, where people aren't just using those tools, but they're using existing databases of info that can actually identify people and identify companies based on the visitors to your site. So you can look, there's a partner we have called Bombora. They're the main source of data for Drift and some other tools that you use on site. Basically, let's say you go to a conference, you talk about your product, you publish an article, you get some press, administrators hear about your product, whatever it may be. Now those people visit your site, they maybe read through a few things, and you don't know necessarily if they're interested or not. You don't really know who they are because they haven't entered an email. Previously, you would have to get them with a lead magnet. But actually now you can use these tools to identify the actual company or university they're from. And that way you have an idea of which accounts are interested in your company and in your product, and you can scale accordingly as far as where to direct your budget. But it all starts with cold email as far as directing people in. Personalized email is really the way to go. I'm not talking about newsletters here or company updates. That's less of a marketing thing and more of a kind of, customer maintenance, customer support type functionality. What most people don't get is that cold emails are not actually meant to be sent through tools that are used for ABM like Pardot, etc., because they require you to put the unsubscribe at the bottom, and they basically explicitly don't allow non-permission marketing. The reality of the fact is you can handwrite emails and have them appear personal, and you can use what you've handwritten to email a larger group of people and have it also look like it was written out one by one and have it be valuable information to the person that's not annoying them. I like to give kind of a few examples of some really good email templates I have. No emails work in all scenarios. And in general, email works a lot less well for a B2C function. In the cases of, Greg, with you doing trials and that kind of thing, it actually probably works pretty well. I've had a lot of success, emailing professors and things like that. But the larger the scale, the harder it becomes to segment people. But this was an email template we used. We sent out en masse, only had one merge field, but it took into account things that we knew about the list, that they're in New York, and that they're a fellow marketer. And we were able to get 100-ish attendees to an event, a paid event that we were doing earlier this year. This is a similar thing for a sales template. This is actually probably one that would work well in an ed tech context. There's more of an art to this than it appears, but just kind of to give you an example of how this stuff actually works. You always, if the cold email is kind of entering people into the funnel, it's a no-cost marketing technique, right? You're not paying for ads or anything. You can actually use that to kickstart the ABM process. For an early stage company, you might not have the budget per se to do huge, Google campaigns or Facebook campaigns where you're really going to get a return with larger institutions. It's really a good idea to use cold email kind of as the first phase in the funnel. And it's key to connect these cold email tools that you use to a piece of ABM software, which we'll get into in a minute, to be able to remarket to those people and be able to identify them after you've already generated interest. I'm sure you guys are familiar with kind of a typical kind of like account-based funnel. What we're talking about with cold email is really an engage strategy. But there's other stages in here that can be used with your other marketing methods. Primarily, what I'm talking about is remarketing, so showing advertisements or even better content to people who have visited your site, where you're taking them through a sequence from knowing nothing about the company, being familiar with the brand, being familiar with the concept behind your company if it's new and interesting to them, and then actually taking them to take some action, whether it's opting in, and gradually you get their foot in the door, and then you're able to actually sell to that account.
I had a question.
Go ahead.
So we have people, visiting our site, and we're using remarketing. We're trying to do display. How many people do you really need before you can build an adequate retargeting audience?
In our experience, it's generally we've had the best results probably over like 10,000.
Okay, good to know.
So it's harder when you have a smaller audience, smaller number of visits, but that doesn't mean it's not worth doing, because if you're like me, so what you're selling is potentially high ticket, and one positive interaction, one touch could potentially be what makes it happen. So for example, maybe we have 2,000, 3,000 people visit our site per month. There's no way we could do a super sophisticated funnel where we segmented them, because the individual audiences are pretty small. That being said, it's going to help our email campaigns, other marketing we're doing, if at least some portion of the visitors to the site are seeing our brand in another way, whether it's on organic sites they browse, or through an ad, or through an email. So it's still worth doing as a quality control thing. But as far as looking at remarketing as generating a definitive return and being able to assess it in that way, you really have to be, the audience have to be a little bit bigger. Cool. So, going into the actual tools, I get the top there is kind of what's the newest. Bottom is a little older. None of them are obviously that old, but definitely the trend to pay attention to is the visitor identification and audience intelligence. A lot of these companies are being able to catalog info on institutions as far as what technology they use, where they spend, what their decision-making structure is. Even we had a guy on our podcast, I don't know if you're familiar with Moz. It's like the search engine, one of the biggest kind of search engine research tools. But we interviewed the founder, and he's creating a tool called Spartora, which basically allows you to look at an individual company, universities included in this, and see basically what their trends are as far as in what they're researching. So they're actually connecting Google search data to the companies, which is very helpful in a higher ed setting where people might be searching for very niche, very specific things, and you need to get an idea of whether there's actually any interest in there for targeting them and connect the company with the idea. And that's going to get better and better. It's not quite at the point where I would say it's useful in a higher ed setting, but if you're selling to companies, potentially academics, it could be that type of ABM tool could be pretty useful. But I would say a tool like Discover.org is another one. They catalog the data. It's an incredibly expensive tool, but it has tons of info on basically all higher ed institutions, their spend. They have numerous ways of collecting it, but it actually connects it with the technical information and the marketing info, and would allow you theoretically to run much more sophisticated sales campaigns on those accounts, because you could hit tier after tier to try to get to the administration. But overall, yeah, information's becoming more and more public to marketers, even with, these concerns about people's data. Doesn't really apply to the corporate world as easily. So 3 main components of it: acquisition, conversion, and conversion. Acquisition would be targeting your pipeline with content continuously. So this is basically like pre-preparing the accounts for what you're actually going to do directly. So we're talking about blogs, PR, stuff that's valuable to them and interesting to them that you can kind of hand over, that will eventually make them aware of you, or at least make them more likely to respond to an actual sales context. You can deliver this with email. You can deliver this with remarketing. Ideally, at that point, you already have a broad sense of who you're targeting, and you have the characteristics of that audience, so you can acquire them. Then the next step of it is a conversion campaign, basically converting these random people who read about you and getting some of their people, some of the decision makers, into a sales funnel. That's where the email comes in. You can also use, remarketing or ads in general for this phase. Greg, I think in your case, it might be more valuable. It's harder to do with administrators just because they're very wary of sales-oriented ad copy.
Sure, we're also like B2B to C. So like we have each individual user will have its own login, and it's kind of like Slack or Monday with the model.
Got it. So there's a secondary process too, as far as you.
Yeah, there's group and enterprise features, and that would appeal to having like an institutional license. But there is the individual user. So like we'll have those users log in quite often once they download, and they have a lot of functionality themselves. And if they want group functionality, or if an institution wants group functionality for them, then that's how we go to a bigger account.
Got it. Cool. That makes sense. And then the third phase of it is obviously actually converting them into doing business with you. Ideally, you have them in
and then we also have like a sign-up email, and a week later, explaining the upgrade to premium and things like that. And so a lot of different parts of the funnel are, like you said, are very relevant.
Nice. Cool. Do you use a chat? Do you use any kind of on-site conversion-oriented stuff, like a chat bot, or?
For now, we don't. Just have newsletters. We sent out something for feedback. We try to make it easy for them to contact us, but for right now, we have no chat bot.
Got it. So it doesn't necessarily, the on-site funnel doesn't necessarily have to involve a chat bot. Certain people integrate like cold calling into it, where you have people visit your site, you already have their number hooked up, and then you call them. But context and timing is very important, and you can't necessarily always get someone, via your email or via your ads in a decision-making context. So that third step, that the actual final conversion is super important, especially if you have a freemium product where there's a trial, that you're targeting people and you're targeting those accounts when they're actually available to convert. So the biggest question I think to think about is with ABM is how many times are your leads touched, meaning how many times are you actually getting in front of them and hitting them from different angles? And in the cases of universities, who are you hitting? Really, when you're building up an ABM system, or just an ABM strategy in general, this is the first question you want to answer. Generally, there's a specific answer for how many times your key leads need to be touched before they convert or they take whatever designated action you're trying to get them to take. And then from this decision, or from this conclusion, you should be able to decide what you actually have to implement. This is a larger graphic that I like, that deals more with how it applies to your personas and scoring them. In a larger company, this having a more detailed process where you are segmenting accounts based on how much they engage is going to be extremely effective for your budget, because you can then allocate more budget to accounts that are going to generate more return for you. If you're in the early stages, it's less important. But once you get up to spending, significant amounts a month, or just having larger campaigns, you have to have a process to be able to score them, and it's not going to be based on the customer profile necessarily. It's going to be based on what actions they take. And in that case, it's really key to have the tracking, software in place. So ed tech, what are the kind of unique challenges? And there are many. The audience can be narrow as far as defining decision makers nationwide. And it's sometimes difficult to find them, and it's difficult to hit them. It's not like, HR managers at pharma companies. It's a lot more difficult as far as finding who the decision makers are. The email sequences tend to be a little harder to carry out too, due to some of the email servers that a lot of schools use, and just the security that they have set up. And then third, an ABM process really is best done in like a few months period. That's kind of where I've seen, most companies have a sales cycle in that kind of length. But the EdTech sales cycle for higher ed is obviously much longer, year, 2 years. And so it's going to be a higher cost to actually maintain that funnel. And you're probably going to need to spread those touch points out over time, which is going to lower your yield, basically. Really, the only way you can kind of decide this is doing your own math. It's going to be different for every type of company. Everybody has a different persona. Different positions in place. So you really kind of have to calculate specifically what's the payoff for you as far as implementing ABM tools. And that's kind of it. That's a broad overview. There's obviously very specific things in each individual part of this process. But I guess my biggest takeaway for everyone would be there's a lot of stuff out there that you probably don't know about as far as targeting and account-based marketing that you should find and implement. But don't be like fooled into thinking that it's going to be as easy as they say it is for, like a typical SaaS company, because higher ed has those challenges, and you should approach it cautiously. Any questions? And that it could be about any topic that we addressed briefly, email, ads, etc. You guys there?
Yeah, we're thinking.
Okay, gotcha. All right.
I can get us started. So I think I talked a little bit about this is AJ again, talked a little bit about our company. We work with education leadership, and our app, basically integrates all of the data that schools or districts or nonprofits use into one place, and then it walks them through the process of using the data to come up with a plan towards meeting their goals. So our clients are a very specific kind of niche group. These are the people who are leading the schools or the districts, not the teachers themselves. They're usually the buyer and the user. So we're selling to them directly. It is very rare for them to be evangelized, kind of up from their teachers. However, they do talk to each other. So our biggest way to get clients so far has been through referrals. And because we're selling a new product that doesn't really exist as is in the market, and introducing a new concept, like what would be some recommendations that you would have? So we have a few challenges, right? Like we're working with a particular group within the ecosystem. We're also selling a product for which there is no clear comp or like a competitor out there. because we're not an analytics company, we're not a strategy consulting company. We're kind of like all of the above in one place. So we find sometimes a little bit challenging to think about, like, should we do like a white net kind of email marketing campaign, or should we like create our content on the website? What kind of would be our, just based on obviously the very little information that I just gave you, what are some things that can come to mind?
Yeah. Content is a must for any business, especially in education, even if there's not necessarily an evangelizing process, for your potential customers. So I would address that everyone kind of base, but look at the actual marketing acquisition separately. Just assume that you have to do content, you have to do it right. As far as actual acquisition strategies and you not having competitors per se, what I tend to recommend as far as companies comparing themselves or looking at other companies for direction is try to find companies that are targeting the same groups that you're targeting and have similar kind of needs or problems that they're solving, even if they're not a competitor and they do nothing that's, like you guys. I guess, let me try to think of an example for that. Let's say you're selling a marketing service. You're doing email marketing for psychiatrists and nobody else is doing email marketing for psychiatrists. And let's also say I would look at like a site for mental health that offers advertising. How do they advertise to psychiatrists? So just look at somebody who is selling to the same type of person and solving the same need. In that case, it was more appointments. And then try to find out whatever strategy they're doing as far as email versus ads versus anything else, social. So, that's kind of where I would go at it.
Makes sense. Thanks, Chris.
And then, the referral thing, I would not incentivize it. The thing with referral programs in general is it's not necessarily the incentives that get people to refer it. In pyramid schemes, it is. The referral scheme is not necessarily a pyramid scheme. People want to know what's going on and they want to provide value to other people. It's like you recommending a restaurant to a friend, you feel good about it, you're doing a favor for them. So you have to educate them enough on your product where they would want to refer it. So in your email sequences after you've acquired them, talk about the value of your product, who it can help, get them invested in kind of the problem you're solving, and then try to make them think about who else it would be for. You don't have to ask them directly per se, but that stuff tends to happen organically if you just frame it the right way.
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah, that's very helpful.
Cool.
Hey, Chris, I have a question. This is Lucas Capaz. Sorry, I got here a little late, but I had trouble with my computer. We are a company doing training and education through immersive technologies and data analytics. And we found that we've done some, let's say, some blogs, even though it's tough to have the time to write, on a periodic basis. But we find that, the people in the industry that are trying to solve the same issues or are within the, virtual or augmented reality environment, they understand and actually like a lot what we have to say. But then our customer doesn't get it. Or it's tough for us. And how do we, they're not engaged as much. How do we try to get customers to understand that what we're doing, that is actually valuable for them. If it's, I mean, are we doing it wrong, doing like blogs and publications every now and then that are too probably technical? I mean, is that?
That's hard, yeah. Blogs are not as useful as they once were. It really depends on the market you're in. In this case, yeah, I agree. I don't think even just posting regularly, especially if it's technical, that it's going to have a great effect or be a great idea. I would focus more on your onboarding materials, videos, your front-facing copy, sales collateral, your website. I don't think the content necessarily is going to.
Our website's terrible. I mean, it's not good. It's not terrible, but it's definitely not as good as we want it to be.
Yeah. I think it's more probably by virtue of the niche that you're in. I've worked with a couple different VR, AR type companies, and a lot of them share the similar problem just because it's something you either get or you don't. And if
you experience it, then you understand what it is. But then talking about it is tough.
So you have to focus on getting them to experience it.
Okay. All right.
They're not going to understand it from you describing it. You have to get them to experience it, and you should be working on what's leading them into actually taking that lead. But I've noticed that content in that space tends to be tough to do.
Thanks. Cool.
Anybody else? All right, cool, guys. Well, I appreciate it. I'm going to drop my email here. If anybody has any questions or needs, marketing stack recommendation or anything like that. Hopefully you guys have some success and started some feedback and maybe get on one of these.
Yep, I'll be sending out the feedback forms to you all after the session. Thanks again, Chris, for hosting this. I'll stick around for a couple of minutes in case anyone has any questions about the incubator, but if not, you all have a good rest of your week.
All right, have a good one, guys.
Thanks.